In 1979, of course, during Operation Urik and the cancelled Operation Manacle, bridges and strategic targets became fair game.
During 1979, the RLI was involved in several significant cross-border operations. The largest and the most costly was Operation Urik, which took place that September. RLI and SAS troops, with the South African Recce's and Rhodesian engineers in support, attacked the Frelimo-Zanla garrisons of Mapai and Malvernia across the southeastern border into Mozambique. Dogged by bad weather, the assault was delayed several days, which enabled Frelimo to bring in reinforcements.
We are allocated extra ammunition and special gear for the mission. I am given an RPG-7, which I love, with half a dozen rockets. Lance Corporal Barry Gribben, Support Commander.
We were talking about the bridges. The bridges were going down. I don't know if that's a good place to pick up on where we left off last time.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, what happened was the troops were evacuated at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon from the bridges because they'd downed all the bridges. The bridge at Barragem, the rail bridge was down, but the road was sort of partially active to light vehicles. At Barragem, you know, of course, there was that scene with Dick Paxton coming in to do an SAS Casavac a little bit earlier. And he got shot down by an RPG rocket as he was landing. And unfortunately, Tech was killed, a guy called Wesson. And the SAS, meanwhile, on the opposite side of the river, as I understand it, I mean, I was there, managed to kick the threads off one of their anti-aircraft guns, which they turned on them, which enabled another aircraft to come and Casavac Dick and his Tech. But anyway, it was the most successful operations. Joey Deploy ran around town in Barragem with his little one commando guys, and they laid waste to the place while the thing was going on. But generally, the SAS and the engineers did a marvelous job. They managed to drop all the bridges, and the aircraft returned to the forward assembly point at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
But it seems like problems set in with the trench lines when they were trying to clear out the defences there. Is that something that was underestimated in the planning stages?
You know, honestly, really asking the wrong guy. I wouldn't know. But I understand, you know, in various places, particularly at Barragem, the SAS encountered fairly stiff resistance, and they did very well to winkle these guys out. Because as I understand it, I mean, I wasn't there, the defences were on both sides of the river. So it wasn't just a simple matter of, you know, dealing with one lot of that, a whole lot to deal with. And plus there was a little town there as well, little garrison town.
So when the bridges were going down, where were you and your guys, Nigel?
Okay, what happened was, as soon as the helicopters left to take the bridging parties, the demolition parties to the bridges, we were at Buffalo Range, and we boarded 4 decks, I think, and we parried and we flew for about an hour south to the forward assembly area, which is southeast of Djibouti. You've got it on the map, and we actually jumped into the forward assembly area there. We didn't come in by chopper, and we rolled up our parachutes. The reason there'd been a bit of a delay with the dispatch of the bridge demolition parties was that a patrol of Frelimo, about 30 in strength, I think, had arrived unexpectedly at the forward assembly area. And Pete Vondel and one commando's guys who were guarding forward assembly area dealt with them. I think there were about 29 Freds killed and 1 captured. But in the course of this, Pete Vondel was wounded in the leg. And when he got back from the bridging demolition story. Joey Deploy was the next senior guy and one commander. And so consequently, he took over the one commander detachment there. And as you know, I mean, he lost his life the next day. And, you know, I mean, that was fortunate for Pete Bondell because it could have been him as opposed to Joe. So, I mean, that's the luck of the draw, unfortunately, in these things. So Pete Bondell was... So all of that was a little bit late. And we just stood by at Rhodesia in our para harnesses. And as soon as the bridge demolition and everything was on again, after this little altercation at the Port Assembly area, we were flown through the assembly. I think there were 4 or 5 decks of support commander, 72 guys, and we were parachuted into the Port Assembly area. And we kind of bivvied up and waited for the next day. And at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the demolition parties came back and they went to collect all the mining parties. And we stood by for the next day.
So that night, all quiet, is it? What?
No, it was very quiet. I mean, my CSM, Graham Henson and I were in a little bivvy together, and the guys were scattered around. It was quite hot, in fact. And there were these little clumps of, I think it was Tambuti bush or something like that, that we managed to snivel into to get out of the blazing sun. We'd been told that this pan was actually full of water, and we were going to jump into water, but it turned out to be a lot of nonsense. So we stayed there, and then early the next morning, as soon as the choppers dropped the demolition parties, they refueled and they went back to stay at Kinder Pools, which was like the safe base for the large helicopters. Early the next morning, they came back again, and I think there was a bit of a thing where they went and deployed a couple of mining parties, and Garth Barrett, who's in charge of the Mapai salt teams, briefed us all together with the chopper pilots, and off we went. Now, I've got a map here that I sent to you, and if John could bring it up when I talk to this map,
right.
It's a general map of the area, and it shows the plan and what we've got. Okay, here's a map of the Pai area, quite a large scale map, and its environs, and you'll see top kind of left, bottom kind of right, the road railway link that connects Mapai and Mabalon and Malvernia in the north. If you look to the left, this is now orientated north. You will see the Mapai, the FPLM 2 Brigade headquarters, which was going to be the position we attacked. And then all the way around, as you can see, there are many, many anti-aircraft gun positions. There's Zanla camp that you see there. You can also see the flat-base radar. A lot of these anti-aircraft guns were radar controlled. And you can see that they were fairly spread out all over. I mean, they weren't just confined to the immediate target. I mean, they were ranged so that they could attack incoming aircraft long before the aircraft got controlled. It's used, generally speaking, in what's called the passive role, where it doesn't emit any signal. So it just kind of scans the area in a passive role, and it can pick up aircraft movement. Once it wants to track a radar, once it wants to track an aircraft, it's got to start sending out this pulse, and then it goes into the active mode.
Yeah.
And in that active mode, the Warthog DACs and all the other surveillance equipment can then pick up the radar. So whilst it remains in the passive zone, you can't see it. As soon as it goes to active, it emits a signal. And so consequently, all these, as soon as the aircraft started arriving in the target area, there was a tremendous amount of radar clatter going on in the area, as reported by the Warthog DAC, because all these 37mm guns were radar controlled, as was the flat place radar, and they were picking up targets left, right, and center.
Right.
Anyway, let's get back. Around about 8 o'clock in the morning, when the heavy helicopters arrived and they refueled, Garth Barrett, who was in charge of the SAS contingent, and he had with him, I think, Graham Wilson and 1 or 2 other guys. The whole of the SAS squadron was there, and myself. We had a little bit of an O group to discuss how we were going to manage this assault on Mapai, and then round about 10 o'clock, we got airborne. Now, in the meantime, at 6:30 in the morning, before we even featured on the scene, the Canberras and the hunters, six Canberras and Mortars, had put on a fairly heavy airstrike fire long before we got there. And they'd also started attacking various other targets. But all the time, airborne over the Mapai area were two hunters in a kind of backup role in case there's any interference. So we all clambered aboard these aircraft. There was 12 Pumas and 6 Cheetahs. And I was in one of the Puma aircraft together with my CSM, the support commander. I think we had 4 Pumas altogether that took support commander into and the assault was on the basis that there was 120 and there were 72 support commanders. In addition to that, getting back to this map, there was a position right to the north would be a 1 commander stop group, hopefully to try and pick up any escapees from the target area as the bombing went on and deal with them. And similarly to the south, there was another one right at the here. You can see, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of this, there was a spot marked where the crash of the Puma 164 took place, and you can see on the left, right, that was the target. 2 stop groups, 190 odd guys dropped to the 2 kilometers to the west of the target and would move in. And that ground assault under the command of Golf Barrett would take place. So I was under command of Golf Barrett, but him and myself were on the command net to the commander who's in charge of the overall operation. I also had another radio operator where I controlled my troops, and Garth probably had 2 or 3 where he controlled most of the SAS because they had their 3 squadrons. At 10 o'clock in the morning, we took off from the Board Assembly area, and we headed almost due west from this Board Assembly area to Mapai. And the plan was to run in south of Mapai, then turn north and drop the troops to the west of Mapai, between Mapai and the Limpopo River. On the way to the target, there was an unfortunate scenario where one of the features started vibrating very badly, and they had to put down. So that was the loss of another lot of 1 commander troops who could have been with us. And then shortly after that, when we were due south of Mapai, and in fact I was sitting in my Puma and on the right-hand side of the aircraft with my legs, and my CSM was next to me. Our legs were out the door, and we were watching the airstrikes because Mapai was ahead of us. We were watching the airstrikes go in this huge column of black smoke. That's when the tragedy of Puma 164 took place. Of course, we were flying in a formation, and here I have another detailed map of what actually happened. We were flying in a formation of 4 helicopters, which we were hotel section up to Scotland, and out to our left were all the Cheetah helicopters from the Rhodesian Air Force and 1 Puma, which was from the Hotel 1 section. And it must have been about 100 meters away from us. We were the closest deck in our kind of 4 o'clock position. And Graham Henson was saying to me, "No, I'm sure my brother's in that aircraft." And I said, "Oh, really? Anyway, we're just about there. We were probably 5, maybe 10 minutes away from landing. And suddenly, that aircraft wasn't there anymore. And there was a shout from the cockpit because I was flying with leading the senior guy of hotel section, guy called Commandant Hawker. And he kicked the aircraft to the right. And as he kicked it to the right, we could see there was this huge pool of black smoke coming up virtually from underneath us. And that meant that that aircraft had gone down. And Graham said to me, "My brother's in that aircraft. My brother's in the aircraft." I said, "It can't be. It can't be him. It's just cool it." Anyway, that aircraft had been hit. It was a concealed FBLN position where we'd flown over. And it was obviously a lucky shot. That aircraft had been hit just behind the pilot seat on the right-hand side, where there's a cabinet of kind of hydraulic lines that control the aircraft. Obviously had a director there, and I mean the pilot didn't have any control of that. It was obvious what was going to happen. You know, the Puma was, as I said earlier, a little bit of a softer aircraft than, say, for instance, Peter, because all you had in the American combat helicopters were these great big iron rods that used to push and control them. And there were very little hydraulics, whereas the Puma was primarily driven by hydraulics. And, you know, maybe if it had been a Peter, it might not have gone down. Anyway, that's what happened. So unfortunately, anyway, you know, this thing is what John's got a copy of this,
Yeah.
and he can bring it in.
Yeah.
These Pumas were hell of a fast airplanes. I mean, it was like sitting on the outside on an express train where you're moving like crazy. And we eventually went around the bottom of Papai, and we could see in the distance the air strikes going in. And then we landed about 2 kilometers away from Papai on a fairly open area and fairly close to the Limpopo River. And the SAS then landed with us, and there was a road running from the river straight into Mapai, and the SAS took up the northern part of the road, and we took up the southern part. SAS had nearly twice the number of troops that we had. And so we started moving when we were all shook out, and I was in contact with Garth, and I could see him. We started moving slowly forward, and we must have gone about, I would think, 1 kilometer. And then it became very obvious that there were enemy signs, because we were moving through a fairly open area, but everywhere you could see these kind of triangles of long poles connected and pointed into the area, and a little kind of lookout thing on top, where obviously the sentries were posted to look over. And I think the SA had the same thing on the same side, on their side. But these sentry boxes, or sentry posts, were abandoned. And there's a lot of detritus and kind of semi-shell scrapes and that sort of thing around. But we progressed slowly forward, keeping in line with the SAS. And I don't know how far we must have gone, but I mean, there was no sound in front of us. So I just said to the guys, keep quiet, you know, let's get as close as we can before we have to get involved in a firefight. And unfortunately, we were very lightly armed. I mean, all we had was fire force equipment. I mean, rifle. I think that the heaviest weapon we had was a 60mm mortar. And I don't think we'd even bought the base plate. So, I mean, you know, it was going to be fired in the shoulder or something like that. Anyway, and each of us carried a 60mm mortar bomb. So we had about 60 bombs, and that was it. And I mean, sensibly, and we'd never thought of it. I think to the SAS had at least had a good sense to wear steel helmets, whereas we had like normal fire force jungle hats and that sort of thing. Anyway, we'd been going for about 20 minutes or so, fairly quietly, and then mortar bombs started to fall behind my position, because obviously the little sentries sitting up there had said, oh, okay, that's where they've landed now, and they relayed the instructions back to their mortar positions, and they started mortaring behind us, which suited me fine because it wasn't on top of us. And the SAS then started to encounter what I understand was a fairly hectic trench system. It zigzagged back and forth, and it curled around, and they had a hell of a difficult time in that trench system, because, you know, as they moved through the trenches, and they were doing a marvelous job. I mean, they were being infiltrated from behind by Frelimo, who obviously had this as a practice draw. And then we went a little bit further, and I'll show you on the air photograph a little bit later. We got into this area of fairly thick bush, and the SAS hadn't arrived at the thick bush yet. They were on the left side, and they were still heavily embroiled in their trenches. You know, and I thought across my mind, maybe I must say to God, can I give you a hand over there? Anyway, that's where. Have you still got connection?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there were these mortars going over us, And then the SAS, I mean, we were getting the occasional RPG rocket which would shoot through our ranks because it was an overfly from the SAS engagement that they were going to. There's a bit of shrapnel whizzing around. But I mean, really, we had a very light time of it compared to the SAS, who were really battling their butts off. After about 20 minutes, I suppose, the SAS then Garth said, let's just stop the advance for a minute. We want to put on an airstrike. So we stopped, and I think to their left and slightly north of them, but forward of them, there was a heavy anti-aircraft gun that was causing all kinds of problems. So there were two hunters cab rank above us, and Garth directed them in on this gun, which silenced the gun. And then we continued. And, you could hear from what was going on with the SAS that actually the battle was getting increasing in crescendo. And they were having a fairly hard time of it. I mean, I remember those hunters when they went in, I think it was Alf Wild and Vic Whiteman or someone, two guys like that. I mean, from the time the aircraft was in the perch position until the time it delivered, you couldn't see it. It was just, the only reason you knew it was an aircraft because of all the airbursts all the way around the aircraft. It was just a mass of airbursts from the anti-aircraft guns. And it was quite obvious that a lot of the anti-aircraft guns had not been silenced in the two air attacks before. We then entered an area of fairly thick bush, and I'll show you a bit later on the egg photograph. And then we were stopped again because they said, okay, listen, you guys, we've got to try and take out these anti-aircraft guns. Can you get an idea? Can you give us an idea on your gridded map air photo where you think these guns are? Well, I mean, there were quite a lot of them firing to the front of me. But I mean, I was in such thick bush that, I mean, there was no hope of me giving any kind of accurate lockstep of exactly where these guns are. But I did my best. And Garth gave a few targets. And then there were more airstrikes put in. We say, grid B, bottom right-hand corner, you see a bush there, we think there's one there. But in fact, reality, we didn't really know because it's fairly thick bush and it was very flat, so you didn't have any elevation to actually support these weapons. As I say, getting back, the crescendo of the intensity of the action that the SAS was involved in became fairly hectic. And Garth got on the radio to me and he said, let's meet you on the road and have a discussion about this. So, I mean, I went across to the road and I met Garth. I think Graham Wilson might have been with him. And Garth said to me, what do you think? And I said, well, I mean, you're asking the wrong guy. Because, I've hardly been involved with this thing. I've taken a bit of shrapnel from your side of the road and I've been mortared behind me, but I mean, otherwise I'm in battle. And he then went on to describe what was going on. Then he said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I don't know, Garth. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I said, Garth, I don't know what we should do. You're the best judge of that. But, from my best reckoning, we're probably 300 or 400 meters from their main defensive line and their perimeter fence. And if it takes us another hour to get there, we're going to be there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we get involved in all kinds of little jousts all over the place. One must understand that those little firefights are going to continue into the evening. And then we're going to be kind of marooned there. And I don't think that's a clever trick. And I said, if we have casualties moving any further forward, and you guys are the same, we would have difficulty even now extricating them and getting them gasoline. We go another 500 meters and we're sitting on top of the bridge, and there are all kinds of little firefights all over the place. Understand that's where our casualties stay. Yeah. So he said, yeah. So he said, what would be your recommendation? I said, God, you're speaking to the wrong guy. I've got no experience of what you guys are doing there, but it doesn't sound too sharp to me. And he said, yeah, I think I agree with you. So I said, I don't think that if we pursue this course of action, that we're going to have an awful lot of joy. Because, it had been someone's assumption And you can see it from the orders. I mean, the first op directive said exploitation of Mapai. Next one said attack Mapai. And in fact, really, the orders should have read to capture Mapai. So there was some doubt as to how successful, we attacked Mapai on the basis that the planners hoped that everyone would have captured out of the fortifications by then, and taking long strides in the opposite direction, so we could get in there and destroy their fuel supplies and their food supplies and destroy all their weaponry, everything. Well, they didn't. They stood there, and I think if we'd stayed on till the next morning, they would have had the better of us for a long time. We knew the area. They were better armed than us, and I think it would have been foolishness, height of foolishness. So anyway, the voice of the message came back, and I think everyone, to a certain extent, the judgment had been clouded by what had happened earlier when they'd lost that helicopter, and you really could one afford to have, double or triple that amount of casualties in one day. And so that was obviously some of the thoughts that were going around in the decision makers' minds. So I think wisely they took the decision. Okay, you guys, withdraw and make your way to an LZ that we'll inform you about. So Garth and I said, okay, we'll withdraw. I was still sitting at Garth and said, okay, what we'll do is we'll go back about 1 kilometre or so on the road, and then SAS will lead and lead us to the LZ, and support commander, you follow on behind. So that's what we did. We withdrew a kilometre or so and then started moving north to this LZ, which was about 5 k's away. And that must have been 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So, I think it was the right thing to do without any shadow of doubt. I don't believe that we could have been lightly armed like that and up against perhaps armor and heavy weapons, that we would have taken that position. Or if we had, it would have only been the next morning, and we would have suffered a great number of casualties. So anyway, on we trotted towards the LZ, us following one commander. My CSM was at the rear. Incidentally, if I can just go back for a minute, when we landed, prior to the assault, my CSM came to me, Graham Henson. He said, I'm sure my brother was in that aircraft crash. And I said to him, no, it wasn't one. He said, oh, no, he was. I know he was. So I said to him, well, I can still get an aircraft in here, pick you up and take you back. And it was one of the bravest things I've ever heard anyone say. He said to me, my job is to stay here with this commander. Mm-hmm. And that's, so I mean, I don't want to happen. So anyway, that's just an aside, and maybe we should edit in a little bit earlier into this conversation, but that's what he said. So anyway, he brought up the rear, and slowly we made our way to the LZ that the Pumas and the Cheetahs were going to pick us up. But because you couldn't really map read in that area, there was a trog, I think Dave Borhill, someone was going around guiding us, and every now and again we'd throw a smoke grenade, and he'd say, okay, you must go left a little bit now if you want to, and then you're pointing directly at the LZ. So we'd go left for maybe 300 or 400 meters, throw another smoke grenade, and he said, yeah, you're going in the right direction, keep going. And that's the way we made it to this LZ. And I mean, I think, we hadn't really been, maybe the SAS had been, but we hadn't really been physically taxed. I think most of the exhaustion had come from all the adrenaline running around in our systems. Mm-hmm. It's not most of the day. So then the SAS secured the area, or part of the area, and then about 10 minutes later you could hear the helicopters, and I mean you could see them from miles out. I mean, but they're setting up a helicopter like a Puma land. You don't just whip it around and throw it on your front lawn. I mean, it takes quite a lot of doing, and it's these large formations of very big helicopters. So, I mean, they've got to slow down, and they've got to put various things into their gyros and everything, and deploy the landing gear, and eventually they land, which makes them quite vulnerable. Anyway, we were eventually all emplaned, and we set off back, almost flying due east back to the admin base. And in the course of this, we flew over one of their mobile columns that I mentioned earlier. And suddenly the whole atmosphere around us was filled with airbursts RPG-7 rockets. I think one of the pilots in the formation, one of the SAS pilots, got hit in the head with a bit of shrapnel or something.
That's right.
But I mean, we progressed, and then eventually we made it back to the LZ, to the Fort Assembly area. And perhaps it was an exercise worth doing, because one would never know until you tried it whether or not the enemy were going to gap it, or whether they're going to. And it certainly wasn't like a dingo where we poured a whole lot of ammunition on top of them and they all gapped in it and it became a turkey shoot. It wasn't like that at all.
So Nigel, safe to say the enemy was underestimated.
I don't think the target was underestimated. I mean, everyone knew that there were tanks there and artillery, God knows how much anti-aircraft. It was about 400 or 500 enemy soldiers in there. I think what was not correctly assessed was what their reaction would be when they were attacked. And I think this operation was mounted on the premise most of them would happen. And in fact, shortly after we left, go to the LZ to get picked up by the choppers, the Warthog picked up that actually the Zandler guys who were in a camp to the side of Mapai had actually evacuated their camp. They were on their way out. They said, "Adios, we'll see you later, but we're not going to be in this." But I think it's so difficult to. I think target wasn't underestimated. We just hoped that they were going to abandon their weapons. Then the target would have been, the Turkish.
Should they have used artillery? Would artillery have made a difference if they brought in some big guns?
Yeah. I think you're right there, Hannes. I've drawn a whole lot of conclusions from this that I'd just like to share with you. First of all, is the difficulty. One of the challenges that we had was I was never quite sure, and I'm sure the other guys were never quite sure. Were we meant to capture this place? Were we meant to just go there and have a look? Because if we were meant to capture that place and we knew how fortified, there was no ways that we would have gone and equipped the way we were. I mean, we would have had considerable amount of, probably I'd get all my mortar people there, my anti-tank people there, and maybe we could have got some armored cars and some artillery, which was just up the road in Malvernia, and made sure that we had proper supporting fire before we'd attempted to go in. So really, I mean, the decision to withdraw was the right one. But the big problem, as we touched on and you touched on a minute ago, was that the target suppression was never enough. 2 airstrikes, one in the morning and one at about 10 o'clock, and maybe an airstrike before the day, was never going to suppress the target. What you really did, I mean, you just have to go back to the Second World War, where, you'd have artillery barrages of 24 hours in duration before anyone ever attempted to attack. And I mean, there's a very simple principle. If armor are there, you attack with armor. You don't do what the Polish did in the Second World War, which is attack with their horses, as they bravely did with the Germans. You match armor with armor, and you match artillery with artillery, and you make sure that target is properly suppressed before you even attempt an attack. And that was the problem. The other problem that we had, and it's no reflection on either the South African Air Force or the Rhodesian Air Force, was we simply did not have enough aircraft. And I'm talking about strike aircraft. From the first attack that went in and we landed, it was 2 hours turnaround time before the canvas got back. And all the time we were advancing through the bushes, it's kind of eerie quiet. There was no bombing of the target or anything. 15 aircraft up the cab racked. And they just continued one after the other. When they'd expended their munitions, they went home and they were replaced by others. We didn't have anything in there. There were large bags where, apart from the 2 hunters that were got cover, there was no suppressive fire going in on the target. And I think that was big downfall if we continued the attack. Because, I mean, after a bit, and I've never experienced it, but I mean, anyone tells you that after a bit of getting bombed and mortared and that for 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 hours, you know, you lose enthusiasm for continuing to defend this place. Whereas, in fact, I think they had not been sufficiently suppressed to enable any kind of attack to be successful.
Yeah. Nigel, there's also the factor there was a Russian officer presence, I think, in the area.
Yes, I think there certainly was one, according to the reports that I've got. And I mean, there might have been a couple of Cubans as well. I don't know, but I mean, you know, I think, you know, the Frelimo guys, you know, I mean, we, for the SAS and the Sleuth Scouts, for 4 or 5 years had been running around there. And I think the Frelimo forces realized what they're up to, and they were gradually beginning to assert themselves. And they were beginning to say, hey, listen, guys, we don't have to run away every time these bloody Rhodesians spit you out. You know, we can take them on if we've got sufficient oomph. So I think they were, you know, they were feeling a lot more assertive than they perhaps had felt in years past, and slightly more confident about their ability to stand their ground. And certainly, I mean, the Russian officers, whoever was there in NTOs, would have certainly stiffened them up.
Nigel, did you have any interaction with the South African commanders, the Recce guys?
Not really. I didn't interface with them at all, except on previous operations where we'd been in Balahuta supporting the SAS. Bert Sachs, famous or infamous as he was, I think he was, choose whichever one phrase you like. He was there with them as well, I understand.
Okay.
I knew the Air Force guys quite well. Monster Wilkins and those guys, because they had previously been Alouette pilots, you know, before. Yeah.
Yes.
And at the debrief, Monster Wilkins, when we were discussing the employment of helicopters, said, you know, you Rhodesians actually need to think about this, because there were times on this operation when we were in limited war situations. And, you know, being a helicopter pilot, I got no business being in a limited war. So you make up your minds, but think very carefully about how you employ helicopters in escalating situations like this. And he was absolutely right, of course. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we got back to the assembly area, and one commander guys was there to meet the aircraft, and you know, he called Log Henson, and he said, listen, I'm afraid, you know, your brother was on that aircraft. There'd been, while we were trying to assault Mapai, there'd been one of the stop groups that was positioned north and south of Mapai had been picked up by Peter and taken to the site of where the aircraft crashed. And that stick under a guy called Gavin Wellberg had examined the thing, and you know, it was just smoke and debris, you know. So, and they were in no position to do anything for any of the people there because of the severe plane, you know. So they reported back on that, and there was an airstrike subsequently put in again onto that position to try and further conceal the origin of the aircraft. And that's really all I can tell you. I mean, you know, we weren't involved in a lot of Urik. We were certainly involved in the hearing part of it, even though we didn't take as much strain as the SAS did. But you know, that's the way it is.
Well, thanks, Nigel. It's certainly a very sort of contentious event in our military history. So very useful throwing as much light on it as possible to try and understand what went right and what went wrong, and what lessons can be learned.
I've got this air photograph that I took here, Hannes, and John's got a copy of it.
Okay.
And there you can see on the right-hand side, you can see the main position there, the Fred position.
Right.
And you can see on the right-hand side all those orange stars, which is where I estimate the SAS to have had all their problems. Okay. And you can see the assault line marked by that black line, the SAS to the north and us to the south. And I think that is probably about as far as we got before we were ordered. Yeah. So we had yet to approach the main fortification.
All right, Nigel. Well, thanks very much again for your time.
Not at all. And John, the other one was the previous talk was a bit of a mishmash. But John and I will get on.
I'm sure he'll patch it up. Yeah. And between that and this, I think we've got some very good material, and we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Anyway, it is what it is.
Thanks, Nigel.
The reason why I've used quite a lot of schematic stuff is that, people need to understand the geography of the thing before they can fully appreciate what went on.
Yeah.
Anyway, Hannes, have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too, Nigel.
And sorry,
just talk about Mike Whitestock. Yeah.
Mike Whitestock was the first pupil when I was at Country. My first year, they opened Hamilton High School, which was in Bulwer. And Mike Whitestock was the first pupil into Hamilton School. And we went through school together, him and Hamilton, me, in Country. And I mean, I think the first year in rugby, we beat them because we were under 13s, and we beat them 100-0. When we got to Form 6, we were 12, 13 or something like that in rugby school. That's how close they got. And I think we call him Witty, Witty. He, I knew that, or not in terms of more because of all the games we played. So, I remember him well.
Well, Mike watches all these talks, so that he'll be pleased to hear that you remember him. He's between Monaco and Joburg. He'd been quite involved in boxing promotions over in Monaco.
But he was a bloody good sportsman, eh?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you know, his daughter became a Springbok swimmer.
Yeah.
And went to the Olympics. So I spent a bit of time down there in Monte Carlo with Mike, and that was an eye opener too. That's just another world down there for opulence and
really,
but I'm lucky to have seen it, and just the whole French experience was really something I'm very lucky to have
experienced.
Yeah.
Did you have good seats at the game?
Geez, Mike, we had a box.
Oh, really?
Yeah, thanks to my wife and the French manufacturer. They had a box. So it just doesn't get any better. We had caviar, foie gras, champagne. It just kept coming.
When you're looking a bit out of sorts the other half.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I just made an absolute bloody pig of myself, and I'm still trying to get over it. But a hell of an experience being there, and just the feel of that stadium. It was a pity about the rain. But all things considered, I think it was a successful World Cup. And I worry about Australia. Now, the next one in Australia, Australian rugby's in complete disarray. I think they've lost interest in the game of rugby. So they've got some work to do in the next 4 years, I think.
Yeah, I mean, professional footy, as they call it, and Australian rules and all that. Rugby definitely takes third place.
Yeah, that's right. It just seems to be a dying game, sadly. Which is a pity, because the Aussies have always brought something to the game. They're always exciting to watch. You think of guys like Campese and John Eales and fantastic.
Yes, yeah.
It just doesn't seem to be happening anymore.
But funny enough, not talking about Australians now. We're about to end this. Talking about the Poms. I was reading in the Times today. The Poms are bitching like hell about the French, because all their supporters went across to watch the games. And now they've come back. There's an infestation of bed bugs in London because all their supporters have come back. They've even bed bugs on the tube, and no one's sitting down.
I didn't see that.
I'll send you the article.
Yeah, send it to me. I didn't see that. That's bloody funny. Well, so it'll give.
So they've always got something to bitch about.
Oh, Jesus, you're right. Hell, they love to whinge. Yeah. That thing with Tom Curry, apart from anything else. So you called a name. Why go and tell the ref? It's just.
Yeah, it's like a schoolboy reporting.
Excuse me, sir. He called me a bad word. No, they don't do themselves any favors. The old Poms.
You know, once the press get their fingers onto something like that, I mean, they tear it to pieces. They'll make
No, and I think it was
They'll
a genuine mistake. That guy Bongi is Afrikaans speaking. He's been speaking Afrikaans since he was a kid, and he was talking in Afrikaans, and so that's what happened. Anyway, all right, Nigel.
Anyway, my son watched the first game, which was down in Marseille, and all he was complaining about was these horse hamburgers. Did you have any horse hamburgers?
No, I don't think so.
Eh? They love it.
They like their horse meat. They eat anything. Those frogs eat anything. I like bloody Chinese.
Yeah, have a good weekend, eh?
Thanks, Nigel. Really appreciate it. Cheers, man.
Keep on. Cheers, eh?